Oh, there we are. Okay, I think we're actually live here. Um, if this is actually working. So, hi, I'm Stuart Ross, and I hope that maybe you're here. I am speaking to you from my basement, which used to be my mother-in-law Carol's, part of my mother-in-law Carol's store, which you can see the sign there, Flamboyant Vintage Clothing. All right, so I have no idea if anyone's here. That's very interesting. I wonder how I find out. Hmm, I'll just keep going and see. Oh, yeah, look at that. People are saying things to me. Okay. Okay, so here's what's happening. Here, let me read you this. But let me say hello for a few moments, a bit more first, and thank you for being here. So my plan tonight is to read entirely from this book here, The Thing in Exile, which was published in 1975, which is about 100 years before any of you were born. And that was my the first place that ever published my poems in this book here, along with poetry by Stephen Feldman and Mark Laba. And I'm going to tell you a bit about that story, and I'm going to read you the poems I wrote back when I was 15 years old. Okay, this is a very odd thing, as I'm sure everyone doing their first live video says. This is so strange. Okay, I'm going to read you this little bit here, and it's from my book, Hey Crumbling Balcony, my 2003 book of new and selected poems. And there's a little afterword, and it goes like this. I was a kid who read Ogden Nash and Rudyard Kipling on top of my Dr. Seuss and Petunia the Duck. Then E. E. Cummings and Edgar Allan Poe and Stephen Crane, who self-published his weird shit. My oldest brother, Barry, showed me John Donne's The Flea, and I read it a million times. When I was 11, I sent out some poems, hand-printed on lined paper, for publication in a Toronto Daily's weekend magazine. I think that was probably the Toronto Star used to have a weekend magazine. They were rejected gently. In fact, I remember the poem that I sent. It was I was 11 years old, so I'll start back when I was 11. If you double a bubble, you have two bubbles, but this information isn't worth a pile of rubble. I don't know why they didn't accept that. It was handwritten on lined paper. It was all very professionally done. Books by Kids, which later became Annick Press, published me in 1975 when I was 16. It was a lovely book called The Thing in Exile, with poems by me and my friends Mark Laba, with whom I'd once run an unsuccessful insect cemetery, and Steve Feldman. Let's see. I think that's all I'm going to read from this. And I've been working on another sort of autobiographical essay here, so I'll tell you what it says here. It says a little bit of repetition. To start with, when Mark and I, because there's a little section of this memoir where I'm talking about Mark Laba. When Mark and I were 16, the year was 1975, we were published together along with another childhood friend of mine, Stephen Feldman, in a book called The Thing in Exile. About a dozen poems by each of us, plus a bunch of ink drawings by me, which is crazy because it was Mark who was the great artist. Anyway, it was the third book published by a small outfit called Books by Kids, run by Rick Wilkes and Ann Milliard. A couple books later, they gave up the idea of publishing books written by kids for kids, and they became Annick Press, one of Canada's most famous children's publishers, eventually the home of Robert Munsch and lots of other greats. When the pages were printed for The Thing in Exile, we were all summoned to Anne's house up in North York in Toronto, and we descended into the basement and walked in hundreds of circles around a ping pong table, collating pages. They were printed on a beautiful textured brown stock, which then got sent off to a bindery. When the book was ready, we had a launch, our first launch, at Anne's house. There were lots of adults milling around, and we busted open a bottle of champagne. I never had champagne at a launch since then. I've never had champagne at a launch since then. I don't remember who all those adults were, but I know we didn't invite any of our friends. I guess we just didn't know how it was done. Anyway, so I'm going to read to you um, the poems that I wrote in The Thing in Exile. And I remember I was talking to a friend earlier today, and I was remembering a poem. My friend Anne, I was remembering a poem that I wrote when I was 13. Um, I didn't know anything about drugs and stuff, but I thought I should be a hippie, and hippies were into drugs. And so I wrote this legendary epic about a hippie, and it was called Jesus Tobacco. And I don't remember anything about it, but I remember at one point in Jesus Tobacco, he injects a joint into his arm because I didn't really know how joints, and I didn't know anything about it. Anyway, he injected a joint. Presumably, it just crushed and the tobacco fell out. But I started writing more and more and less of my pseudo hippie poems, and I got more and more influence, especially by Stephen Crane. A couple of years later, it would be Dave McFadden and Ron Padgett, but I think at age 14, 15, I hadn't actually discovered them yet. So this book, as I outlined before, is the book The Thing in Exile. And if you're interested, by the way, I do have a few copies left for outrageous sums, and I'm all prepared to take your money. So let's see, what do we got going here? So this is it. Oh, I'm going to show you this. This was the little author photo inside, and it was done by the younger brother of my best pal at the time, a guy named Ken Shelson. His younger brother was Lawrence Shelson, and he took this awesome picture of Steve, Mark, and me looking like local toughs. That's me in the middle. That's Mark leaning on that diagonal doorway that's leaning against a railing, and then Steve, who's the handsome one. What else can I tell you about this? Oh, I'll show you my drawings. Two of them I think are okay, and one of them is really bad, but anyway, there we go. That's I was a little bit of a commie back then, so I think it says CCCP on the little fishing boat there. A little drawing by me. Here's the terrible one. It almost looks like I would have been stoned when I drew this, but I wouldn't get stoned for 22 more years after that. Insectus, it's called Insectus. And the third drawing is called Potter. And surprisingly, it's a drawing of a potter. My mom was doing a lot of pottery in those days, so I think it was, look, he's crying. There's a little tear coming down his cheek. Anyway, that's a bit about this book from this press, which later became Anik Press. Books by Kids. Okay, so thanks for being here. And I hope there's some people here. I think there's some people here. We'll see. We'll find out soon. So there's a whole bunch of poems by Stephen Feldman. And then at the end, there's a bunch of poems by Mark Lava. And in the middle, there's all these poems by me. And to be honest, I think there's 12 of my poems here, and 10 of them I have not read aloud in probably, I hate to say this number, about 43 years. So the first one, oh my God, it's an ekphrastic poem. I hate the word ekphrastic. I hate the whole, I just hate the whole ekphrastic thing. I don't know why, even though I've written some things that have been inspired by art. But this is called Jean Dare Nude in the Art Gallery of Ontario. When you stood there posing for Monsieur Rodin, Jean Dare, your fists clenched fiercely in front of you, the sunlight illuminating your Herculean physique, and the look of reckless defiance set deep in your eyes, what would you have thought if you knew that 88 years later, a 5-year-old art critic would poke at your nasties and say, "Ooby dooby doo"? Nasties is a very interesting word. That is a word from the 1970s. So that was, I got, my mom took me to the Art Gallery of Ontario a lot. And I don't know why I wrote about a poem about that really, because the thing that blew me away more than anything, when she took me there when I was about 7 years old in the mid 60s, was that giant hamburger by Klaus Oldenburg. I think it's called Floor Burger. And I later did a book called Hamburger in a Gallery, which the book is named after that piece of art by Klaus Oldenburg. Still one of my favorite places in Toronto, the Art Gallery of Ontario. If there's any, if one of the editors of Best Canadian Poetry is out there, this evening, and they hear this and want to include any of my poems from when I was 15 in the next volume of Best Canadian Poetry, um, contact me. My rates are not bad. I don't go over $1,000 for any of these poems. Mark Alaba and I used to skip school sometimes. Well, we went to an alternative school later on, but we used to always go down to Chinatown, uh, which was such an exciting place and still is in Toronto. And that's where this poem came from. It's untitled. The chicken in the Chinatown butcher shop looked as if he'd been killed, doing a song and dance. It's not very strange when you think about it. We all do a song and dance before being slaughtered, don't we, Mr. Slaughterman? Hat in one wing, cane in the other, whoopee-doo and all that jazz. And the chicken, the grinning chicken, is a regular song and dance chicken. And we all do our song and dance too. So that's sort of existentialist. I would say that I was an existentialist already when I was 15 years old. Um, and Don't Me, Mr. Slaughterman. I think that's probably inspired by Buffalo Bill's Defunct by E. E. Cummings, who says, what do you think now of your blue-eyed boy, Mr. Death? Something like that. Anyway, Chicken in the Chinatown Butcher Shop. That's not bad. It's not a bad one. Okay, so here is oh my God. I did readings when I was like 15, 16. I was going to other schools, junior high schools and stuff, and high schools, and reading, reading poems to them. And this was perhaps the great favorite. It's called Dinner by Candlelight. I'm going to show you the way it looks on the page because it's the stanzas are all over. It's sort of interesting, eh? Okay. They sit directly across from each other, knife and fork in hand, spoons at their sides. I watch through the window as they slice into one another, he eating her brain, she his liver, spooning out each valuable drop of gut and digestive juices and having the pituitary gland for dessert. I have not the heart to tell them to stop, for they ate it yesterday. Notice the use of for. It's very, very literary way of speaking there. And who knew that, at age 15, I'd know what a pituitary gland is. I don't even remember what it is anymore. Anything else to say about that one? Many years later, after I wrote this, like 30 years later, I was studying with a New York poet named Larry Fagan, a great poet, a great teacher, just a great person. And Larry said, do not have punchlines at the end of your poems. Do not try for some fireworks at the end of your poems. He said that the flatter the ending of a poem, the better. And that sounds counterintuitive, but try it. Put a boring ending on your poem. You'll see it makes it much better. I'm serious. Okay. Anyone there? Am I still, can someone just tell me if I'm still visible or whatever? Anything happening here? Can I see? Oh, yeah. Oh, look at that. There's a whole bunch of people here. I didn't even know. Oh, Lauren Shelson remembers Dinner by Candlelight. Hugh Thomas says, Hugh Thomas says that these poems should be in Best Canadian Poetry 1975. Okay, I see all these people here. I didn't realize it. Thank you. And thanks for Alice Burdick likes the title Insectus. You can use that for the title of your next book if you want. Okay, so let's move on. This is a much more minimalist poem, and a little bit more influenced by Stephen Crane. It's not bad. I don't think it's bad. It's untitled again. In the dark, damp world of just before sunrise, in the puddles by the curbs, the worms meet, they pray, they dance, and the almighty worm god answers, my children, you will live long lives. Later in the morning, a child going to school collects dried up worms for show and tell. I guess I was like a master of irony back then, sort of like an Alanis Morissette, before Alanis Morissette even came along. Oh my God, this poem. Oh my God. I haven't read this poem honestly in over 40 something years. And I just, as soon as I saw the first two lines, I went, holy shit. Okay. Okay, here goes. This is so meaningful. I don't, okay. It's untitled again. Back then I had the kind of boldness to not have titles on my poems. And now I'm a coward and I put titles on my poems. 100 years after the great destruction, after the last echo of the last crumbling building had died away, a hand reached from the sky, two fingers met, and a lone figure rose slowly from the ruins. He opened his eyes, began to talk. And he wandered for 40 days, studying everything around him. Finally, he began to understand. He looked to the heavens, outstretched his arms, and screamed, "If you think I'm going to start again, you're nuts." And he crawled back under his rock. It's probably a very timely one right now, as COVID sweeps the globe. So there you go. I did, by the way, I did bring a mask. I should be wearing a mask to set an example. I did bring a mask so that I could protect you all from my COVID breath. So, but it's hard for me to read with it on. So I'm going to sacrifice a few of you just for my reading. I want to mention about that last poem is that there are a lot of things that were capitalized, like great destruction is capitalized. A hand reached from the sky. A hand is capitalized. A lone figure is capitalized. Heavens is capitalized. And interestingly enough, and he crawled back under his rock. Rock is capitalized. And I guess those things that are capitalized are supposed to be very metaphorical, but who the hell knows what I could possibly have been thinking back then. Oh my gosh, thank you for being here. This is, yes, Andrea, perfect timing with COVID for sure. All right. So, oh, there's a little story with this poem, but I'll read the poem first, or maybe I'll finish reading my poems and I'll tell you the story. Gunfighter. He had dusted his death-black hat, polished his boots and buttons, shaved his chin, waxed his mustache, and scraped the dirt and yesterday's eggs from under his fingernails. But at 1 minute past high noon, as the sheriff's bullet pierced his gut, he said, "Damn, forgot my gun." Sometimes the profundity almost knocks me right off my feet as I'm reading these now. I will tell you the story about that. Basically, that poem had originally had the guy say, "Shit, forgot my gun." But the publishers at Books by Kids, wanting to sell these books to kids, said, "Can we change shit to damn?" And then after this book got published, I got a call, a letter from, I think it was someone at Random House or Prentice, someplace that published textbooks, and they wanted to reprint the poem, but they asked for my permission to change "damn forgot my gun" to "darn forgot my gun." So it went from shit to damn, and then it was going to go to darn, but I wrote a 2-page letter back, which I wish I could find right now. The one was named Donna Day Harris, was the acquisitions editor, and who I wrote to. I remember that, it's emblazoned in my brain. And I said that, it used to be shit, and then it became damn, and you want to change it to darn, the next person's going to want it to be golly. And it was this rant, this freedom of speech rant that I put, and I did not give them permission. And I probably would have gotten paid $25 or something, which is more than most writers make in a year, but I turned it down. Okay, here's a rhyming poem. I think it's my only rhyming poem in here. I know that Mark has at least one rhyming poem, and Steve, I think, has a rhyming poem or two. So we all had our rhyming poems there just to appeal to the rhyming audience. There's no title, and it's very, very unpleasant poem. I'm remembering it now as I look at the first lines. The child is lying in the car, her head, sorry, I gotta start again. The child is lying in the road, her head was crushed by a car. The construction men will be there soon. They are paving the road with tar. No one cares about the kid. It wasn't anything that they did. The mother is calling her daughter's a real sinner, the family's waiting to eat, the child is holding up dinner. The stupid pedestrians pass her by, instead of the ground, they look at the sky. The father is getting angry, he doesn't like to wait, he's sitting in the living room, planning his daughter's fate. The blood is trickling down the street, the people try not to stain their feet. The child is lying in the road, her head was crushed by a car. The construction men will be there soon, they are paving the road with tar. Man, um, that's just, that's appalling, is what it is. Appalling. I think the sentiments were okay, but it's terrible. It's got the little refrains in between the major stanzas. Heather Burrell says, "I can see you, but I can't hear you. Why? If you are near Heather Burrell, please turn the sound up on her computer. I'm pretty sure that will help it." Uh, okay. Brian Panhausen says, "Not a commercial sellout after all." Okay. Oh, you know what? This one was the one. This one was the one that was my big hit. The one that made me millions and allowed me to buy a yacht at age 15 or 16. Drive-in movie sequence. It's very romantic, this one. Drive-in movie sequence. We sit at the drive-in in my car, and I hold her close to me. The lower half of my face concentrates on the popcorn, while the upper half watches the film. I watch as Gontar, the thing that eats men, steps on Tokyo and gobbles up Hiroshima. My girlfriend presses closer to me, and I feel her trembling with fear. It's all right. It's only a movie, I tell her, as I fondle the green scales on the back of her neck. Whew. Wow. So I just noticed as I was reading that, and I read that Dinner by Candlelight one earlier, is the two poems that are about a couple together in a romantic situation are both really, really grotesque. One has monsters and the other has cannibalism. So I don't know. I didn't actually have a date till I was 74 years old. So um, I guess that explains it. Oh, here's the title poem, the title from where the title of this book came from. Just got to close a little tab here. Okay, there we go. So this is The Thing in Exile, another one of my social criticism poems. Oh, Heather, I'm glad to see you got the sound up just in time to hear me talk about the yacht that I owned as a teenager. The Thing in Exile. They sat in the garden, sipping tea and pinching the women's behinds. They sat in the garden, beaming and discussing their excessive wealth. They laughed in the garden, belching shamelessly and lying about young girls they had had in Paris. Nearby, the women stood, giggling and talking of one another's clothes. And they all wore masks and connected dots. But the one who had shed his mask disappeared over the hill, carrying his few belongings. And they all laughed in the garden, waving at the thing in exile. And those people all later became Trump supporting Republicans, by the way. I think that's what I was imagining like 45 years in advance. Um, oh, God. There's some funny things there. Hey, Glenn in Ottawa. How cool. Thank you. Heather says, I had a scaly girlfriend. Oh, my God. I just want to sit here and read your comments because I think they're much more entertaining than my poems. There's a few left. And then there'll be a little bit of a question and answer period if you're interested in that. I'm proud of this poem too. It's again a very compressed poem. It's one of the only two that I've ever really read since this book, the year after this book came out, and it was also very influenced by Stephen Crane. It's a lot of poems here about alienation. I was a teenager. Why would I be writing poems about alienation? And I didn't write any poems called loneliness. I'm sitting in my room. I am alone. The walls are closing in on me. I never wrote a poem like that. Okay. Ali says that flamboyant vintage clothing needs to be a poem. That's very cool. You can see that. Okay. Sitting on the curb, the man with no chin half mumbled about the lack of lower jaw. The passers-by laughed at this freak, but he could not complain, for if he did, he'd slice his throat. I think that's more successful than The Thing in Exile, and it's sort of similar in a certain kind of way. I don't know. Again, I use the word for instead of because it's much more literary, and that's why I got the Nobel Prize, or the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Prize for literature. Here's another unpublished one. When Mark and I were down in Chinatown, sometimes we'd wander a little further down to Queen Street. Queen Street, and we walk across City Hall, which was very new at that time. It was like space age. It was amazing. And we walk a little further west, and there was a little Catholic school there, and we were amazed by it because we were just Jews from up in North York. We didn't know things like that existed. And here's the poem that experience inspired. The children in the Catholic school playground were being tended by penguins dressed as nuns. In the Arctic, the polar bears were being observed by nuns dressed as penguins. It was an exchange program. It's not bad. Okay, the last one here. Actually, there's a little bit more rhyming here. The last one is a rhymer, and this is the last one here that I'm going to read, and we can talk a bit if you want. This is untitled. Hi ho, the gang's all dead, he said, as they dragged him down the steps from a party that had ended sooner than had been intended. Poor bastard, guess they'll give him to the Druids, one of the men in white commented. The other added, he was deranged. The first said, and demented. So that is that's The Thing in Exile, and I'm going to read. I should just let you absorb that poem for a bit, but I shouldn't start talking right after a poem. I'm going to read you one little poem by Mark Lava here because it's so flippin' brilliant. Okay, untitled poem. Mark Lava, age 15, wrote this. Baroque painters wandering up and down the aisles of a supermarket, looking for Christ, who is hanging over the meat counter, yelling, "Take a number, please, take a number." And that is the poems of mine from The Thing in Exile. A very interesting comment, it looks to me. Oh my gosh, you told me this before. Jake Mooney's here, Jacob Middlebrow Mooney. Jake Mooney's here, and he says, Anne Milliard, who was one of the two founders and publishers at the time of this book under the name Thing in Exile. Anne Milliard is my wife's godmother, and she gave me this book for a wedding present. She is 91 now. Wow. Wow. Jake, please, if you're speaking to your wife's godmother and she is speaking to Anne Milliard, can you please send her a big social distance hug for me? Because there's such a strange serendipity there. Let's see. Oh, Shannon Siblock says, can we change bastard, the word bastard, to bad guys? Yeah, right. Okay. And the next thing you know, they'll want to, they'll say, can we call them boo-boo heads or something? I don't know. Does anyone have any questions about anything here? Oh my God. Jake says, she talks about you about 1 in 5 times I see her. She thinks you're great. Oh, that's so sweet. I haven't spoken to Anne Milliard in probably about 15 or 20 years or more. So there you go. I did hope to have my letter to Donna Day Harris, who rejected my poem, who wanted my poem, but who wanted to change that last word, damn, to darn. And then I rejected the big offer. So, okay. I'm thinking there might not be any questions. I didn't know. I'm going to go back. Oh, what is your favorite topic to write about? I'll be honest, that's Anita. My Anita, who I used to work with at Harlequin, great pal, and made working at Harlequin much more bearable. Um, Anita says, "What is your favorite topic to write about?" I'm really anti-topic. I was really into topics back when I was 15 because I thought you had to write about something, like you had to write about um, you had to write about poverty and pollution and hippies mainlining marijuana joints and things like that. And it did take me a very, very long time, probably into my, I don't know, into my early um, 30s, I don't know, maybe into my early 20s, to realize that topics come out of the poem after the poem. The poem gets written, and you might have some topic in mind. I try not to, but the topics really seep out of the poem like sort of like pus out of a wound. Um, and and the topic's different to different people if they're interested in there being topics. I'm not a big topic fan, but back in the day, I would say, Anita, that my favorite topic was alienation, and I think if I would consciously sit down and look at what I've been writing, I think that that has never ever changed. Um, I think that um, almost all my characters in my novels, my short stories, they're all outsiders. I remember when I was in high school, my high school English teacher, Anne Smythe, was a great woman. Um, she wrote on one of my stories, "Why are all your characters such blockheads?" Because they were all naive. They were all sort of these naive creatures. So I think there's this idea of, it's a very existential idea that we're just mistakenly thrown onto this planet, and what the hell is this thing? And that's what we try to figure out for the rest of our lives. And we're like weird people incapable of knowing, understanding the vastness. So that's my answer to that. Let's see what else we get. We've been asked here. Um, Holly, I think lives in Kingston. I can't remember now. Says she wished I remembered Jesus Tobacco. I'll try and find it. It was on. I was on manual typewriter on a piece of yellow foolscap. So who knows? Um, let's see. What else do I have? Why was your insect cemetery unsuccessful? Asks Ben Walker, with whom I published a CD of songs that he composed and sang and played instruments for, inspired by my poems, which is called an orphan's song by Ben Walker. So you can order that online somewhere. But what did he say again? What was the question? Why was your insect cemetery unsuccessful? I don't know. Mark and I, we had a red wagon. We filled it with dirt. We walked up and down Panny Hill Road, which is a 2-block road. Well, on our side of the park, there was a park that split it. And then the rich people lived on the other side of Panny Hill Road. We walked up and down with our red wagon, which I think maybe only had back wheels. I'm not sure now. And it was basically like a bring out your dead, but we didn't know that phrase at the time, though if we did, that kind of marketing probably would have been more effective. Um, we yelled that people could bury their dead insects in our insect cemetery for a nickel or a quarter. I don't remember. Um, but no, we didn't have any takers. So we killed insects ourselves. I think we killed a cotton boll weevil, which I feel pretty flippin' bad about. Notice I'm saying flipping. That's so weird. Um, and uh, and then we would wrap up the insects in an ant, and we would wrap them up in Wrigley's gum wrappers and give them a proper burial in our cemetery. But I think it was ahead of its time, and that's why it was unsuccessful. Alice Burdick says, "Yeah, I have ants, and I'm thinking of an ant funeral home. What do you advise?" I think you know a lot more about starting businesses than me. And Alice Burdick runs Lexicon Books in Lunenburg, and it's a spectacular bookstore. And Alice is honestly one of the top 3 great Canadian poets, in my opinion. Any advice for youth writing poetry? Asks Lisa Reynolds. Um, yeah, the main thing that I would suggest is that probably because they've been writing some poetry and maybe they rhyme, because you think when you're a kid poetry rhymes. The first thing is they rhyme, you stop rhyming just to see what happens. It's good to get outside your comfort zone and better poems will happen. But the main thing is to read poetry. Read a lot of poetry. Just go into a library and literally go into the contemporary poetry shelves and pull out 20 books at random and just flip them open and read poems at random and see the incredible breadth of things that is possible. And the other thing is, don't be scared to emulate. Don't be scared to steal. Don't steal lines, maybe, but don't feel scared to imitate or, there's a thing I used to hear as a teenager, and I think I sometimes hear it as an adult now, is I don't like to read other poets because I don't want to be influenced. You've heard that, right? I don't want to be influenced. I don't want to read other poets. So I don't know. I don't want to perform. I don't want to take a course on brain surgery because I don't want to be influenced. I just want to get in there and use my instincts to do that brain transplant. Okay, so Alexander Munker, who is in Ottawa and has a spectacular book collection, says, "What are you reading that's impressing you these days?" I'm reading Wilkie Collins, 19th century novelist, possibly the inventor of the detective novel in English. And I'm reading Wilkie Collins, The Woman in White. I've read that before. I'm reading one called No Name. And what's great about No Name is it keeps switching points of view. Wilkie Collins was one of the first authors to do that. He did that in Woman in White too. But I heard of Wilkie Collins at first because one of my great small press heroes, who I met when I was probably 18 or 19 years old, is a guy named Opal Lewis Nations. He lives down in Oakland, California now, but he lived in Toronto at the time. And he was this British guy who had moved to Canada, and an absurdist writer, a surrealist, a genius, incredible visual artist. You can still find some of his stuff. He's still making stuff. Out of California now, but he said that Wilkie Collins was his favorite writer, and so I'm finally getting into it. But I'm really blown away by Cesar Ira. I love his little 100-page, 90-page novels. He's an Argentinian novelist. I think he's about 75 now, and he's written between like 75 and 100 novels. And I think maybe 15 or 20 of them have come into English. Chris Andrews, I think, is the name of one of his translators, and there's also a translator in Britain. And I'm not going to guess, but I don't quite remember that translator's name. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for any translators who are out there that I forget that. Cesar Ira, I'm reading this book called Art Forum, which is a collection of stories about how tough it is to get copies of the magazine Art Forum in Buenos Aires. I'm also reading, I thought I had the book here, but I don't. I'm also reading The Divided Self by R.D. Laing, which is really, really blowing me away. It's a book about mental illness, the labels schizophrenia, so forth, and basically about people being in the world, as existentialists say. He's an existentialist anti-psychiatrist. Those are the three major things that I'm reading right now, and I can't remember the other things, but I have probably about 5 or 6 books on the go. Jay Millar, a great publisher and a great poet in Toronto, he's Book Hug, he's half of Book Hug, says, "I thought your fave topics were poodles and hamburgers, and I'd add to that different body parts, especially hands and hats." I didn't quite get into poodles and hamburgers until I was in my 20s. And it was the poet Kevin Conley who told me that he noticed that hamburgers were a very, very significant motif in my poetry. It was very astute observation, Jay. As Shannon says, what do you do these days if a rhyme raises its ugly head? There's great rhyming poems. I don't know why people can't really write many great rhyming poems anymore. But if there's people who want to hear rhyming poems and write them, they're welcome to do that. I find rhyming bothers me because the rhymes are distracting, and rhyming also is cleverness. Rhyming is all about, or seems to be all about, cleverness. And that was another thing Larry Fagan told me. Don't be clever. Stop being clever. We've already got Ron Padgett. He's doing it best. So don't be clever. So that's a little piece of information. Hey there, Greg. Thanks for joining us from Montreal, Greg Santos, who just launched his new book, Ghost Face. So I'm not sure if it's actually back at the printer, but he launched it online last weekend. Oh my goodness, Alice Burdick said about something. Who knows what I could have said that would have inspired that. John Phillips, who is an amazing, sweet guy and a brilliant minimalist, cerebral poet. I met him in Ljubljana in September 2018 when I was there reading for the Vilenica, I think it's Vilenica in that case, I'm not sure, a poetry festival, a literary festival, which I was out of the blue. It was, here, I'm going to digress again. I I was on Facebook that day and I wrote something self-pitying, as I so often do, so people can say, nice things to me. If I was a different kind of writer and make different kind of decisions, I'd be the kind of writer who would be invited to festivals. And then that afternoon, I get an email from Slovenia saying, "Do you want to come this fall and be in our festival?" And I got to read in a cave, and I got to read in a chalet, and it was an amazing experience. But on my first day there, bearded guy with a British accent comes up to me. It's John Phillips, who we know of each other through Nelson Ball, I think it was in particular. Um, and John was just such a great guy, and it was nice to have, you know, someone on my side in the audience at that reading. And we've had a great correspondence since. So he asks, why don't you have your own TV show? I think I'm going to do this every Thursday at 7:15, so that's the closest I'm going to come. I feel that Mr. Terrific and My Mother the Car, two great TV shows from my childhood, really were the apex. Is that the right word? The apex of the television art, and so I don't feel that there's any point. And I don't know. I'm being facetious. It wouldn't occur to me to have a television show. But look up Mr. Terrific on YouTube. I think there's an episode there. It's quite amazing. I think maybe we have no other questions left, and we're getting to the 45-minute mark. And I think it might turn off automatically at 45 minutes. Hey, James B. Nice to see you. I don't see you, but nice to see your name appearing there. Hey, Ken. This is my TV show. Yeah. This is a great set down here, eh? So what I was saying is this used to be the part of my mother-in-law, Carol's, vintage clothing shop called Flamboyant. It was on the main floor where I live now, and in this basement here where I store 700 boxes that I haven't opened since I moved here a decade ago, practically. But there's all sorts of interesting things, as you can see, some of them. Those hands are good. The cash register behind me. In that room, there's the various mannequins that startle me quite frequently, and there's a couple of furs, little fox furs or something there. That was, that wasn't always a bad thing, fox furs. There was a time when that was a good thing, and we thought so anyway. And there's little teddy bears, and there's various things still left over. There's tuxedos and wedding dresses and corsets left over from the vintage clothing store. Anyway, that's a little bit about this, and the James B says I have a Paul Myers-ish thing going on, and I don't know who Paul Myers is, but I will look him up. Okay, so I'm going to stop shortly, but oh my God, Becky O'Neill, Flamboyance was our favorite shop. Becky O'Neill, I just want to tell you something, which is that Mark Laba, my youngest buddy when we were kids, his older brother, Marty, was either married or dating your mom back in like early 1970s or something. I'm just telling the world that right now. What else are we going to say here? I can't believe I just said that. Okay. Gary asks, is this where you're currently working on writing? I honestly have written 1.5 poems since lockdown or isolation. I have not been writing at all. I've been writing emails and one project. I'm writing a collaborative project with a guy named Stuart Ross in Chicago. He's a great writer. Read his book, Jenny in Corona. Came out this past fall. It's actually called Jenny in Corona. And amazing, amazing prose stylist. Hilarious, outrageous, offensive book. So we're writing a sort of a collaborative thing back and forth because I really have always dreamed. I haven't always dreamed. As soon as I found out there was a Chicago writer who was a Facebook friend of mine with the same name as me, I dreamed that there would be a book by Stuart Ross and Stuart Ross. So that's what we're gonna do. Um, so Greg Santos is inserting his own commercial into here. Ghostface isn't out yet due to the pandemic, but will hopefully be out soon. And it can be pre-ordered through DC Books, and you can look that up, DC Books in Montreal. Greg is an amazing guy and a really fascinating poet. And he is not scared to do completely different kinds of books because Ghostface is a really different kind of book from Rabbit Punch, I think maybe was the last book. And I really admire that kind of bravery, not to just, okay, this thing's working, I'm just going to keep doing this. And I think that's probably everything. I'm going to say hi to Joe in Ann Arbor because Joe is such a dear friend who I don't get to see much, and we met in Nicaragua or Guatemala or something. Guatemala we met in 1989, and he's a guy I admire very much. And there's a poem for him in one of my books, and I can't remember which poem it is, but it's a poem dedicated to him. But I also have a little chapbook called Mr. Joe, and it doesn't really have anything to do with him, but was inspired by Joe. Thanks for being here, Joe. And all right, there are other questions here. DCBooks.ca is what Greg is telling us. But speaking of ads, I mean, I just as a whim put my little PayPal address up there, and if you are gushing with money, if the Canadian government actually ended up giving you 20 of those $2,000 things a month by accident. Okay. Carrie Barwin says, with the collaborative thing with Stuart Ross, I hope the author name appears as Stuart's Ross. And Ken Shelson counters, or Ross Stewart's. So who knows? They're both. Becky says that her mom and Marty lived in Newfoundland together, as she was a mime and Marty was a folklorist. A little bit of Jewish geography. Thank you so much. I don't know why I've been shy about mentioning that. Becky, by the way, co-owns with her partner this amazing store in Cobourg, Ontario, where I live, and it's called Cardboard Reality. And I remember the first time I walked by and I went, oh my God, there's a store in Cobourg called Cardboard Reality. And they're spectacular animators. Look up their work, Cardboard Reality Studios. And they have this beautiful shop of Becky's art and her crafts and her weird little publications, and also stuff from the farm that they run together. So, and also, if I'm going to be plugging Cobourg things, if you live in Cobourg, Let's Talk Books, which I always want to call Let's Eat Books. Let's Talk Books is doing a delivery. So if you need books, order a lot of books from them because they're a really cool little indie bookstore, and we're so lucky to have them here. And the one thing is, I didn't model this shirt. This is the craziest shirt, and I never would have worn it when I was 15 years old. But this shirt, Lori bought for me from Little Underground, which is now the vintage clothing store in Cobourg, and they're on King Street, and hopefully they're going to be open for a curbside pickup or something soon. And I've now done a whole bunch of commercials for people, and some people are saying that they just got oh, the ka-ching should be my sign off. Maybe. I was going to say, people are saying that they're coming in a little late, and you missed me talking about you for a long time, for one thing. But I think that when I end this, I have the option of deleting it or keeping it on my Facebook page. And unless something goes horribly wrong, I will hit, like I make a mistake, I'm going to save this to my page so you can watch it. Watch it, or you could watch this video. Anyway, I'm gonna go now because I don't want to overstay my welcome. But I think I'm going to come up with some premise for next Thursday, at 7:15 because this has been a lot of fun, and you have been so amazing to be here and spend this time with me. It's just it's really cool. I hope you all stay safe. I hope your loved ones are well, and if you're feeling like an alienated, lonely teenager, phone a friend or Skype or Zoom or write letters and reach out to people. And let's see. Oh, there's one other thing that just came up here. Vallum Poetry says, excuse me, that cough. Don't turn me in. I'm just talking a long time. Vallum Poetry says, don't forget to check out your book review in Vallum, Stuart. Sorry, I was late. Thank you. Okay. Eleni, is that how you pronounce your name? Eleni, thank you. I didn't know that I had a book review in Vallum, and I'm thrilled because getting any kind of bit of attention for one's writing and having someone think about it is a nice thing. I'm going to go. Thank you so much. Take good care. I really, really appreciate your being here and talking with me.